Okay, so we are officially recording. So my thought on the ag trends is that as states, there's so much happening, and I've worked with a lot of different states over the years. And when I first started reaching out to states, I realized we were all kind of in the same quandary. We're trying to find migrant kids. We're trying to pay attention to what's happening with them. We're trying to serve them as quick as we can. And then we have all these reasons why some farms are opening and some are not picking their crop when it looks like, you know, everything is ready and you're ready to do your summer program, and then for some reason the tomatoes rot in the field. And so this was always a real big concern to me in Tennessee. And so we realized early on that we needed to pay better attention to what was happening to our farms. Like, why are certain places seeming to just dry up? We had tobacco in an area and all of a sudden it's not there. Like, what are these factors? What's happening? And so several years ago for IDRC, I was able to do a lit review, just looking at why there was a worker shortage. Why were the numbers we were seeing in migrant going down because we weren't just recruiting? And I'm sure there's a lot of different factors, but was there also a national shortage? And so I'll share a link of where that information is at. But it really opened my eyes to just following what's happening. And then since then, I've been able to have the opportunity for IRC and at different times for GoSoci to do kind of an Ag Trends newsletter. And that really got me interested in just seeing what's happening. And then as I've worked with individual states, I've seen issues that are not issues on the East Coast, for example, water on the West and how that impacts agriculture, and really realized that as a country, there's so many things that are happening that we don't see the big picture. And so specifically about agriculture. So I'm going to try to give you a bunch of the big picture and then a bunch of resources and links that if you're interested, you can learn more. So in every single one of the slides, you'll see in the corner, there'll be something that says source, and it'll take you to where I got these. These are not my words. I did totally copy them from other places, and with the idea that you could then take those links and see it and see what's happening and learn more and really kind of identify what you need to learn about your state. So if you have questions about what I'm saying, please feel free to put those in the box. I will try my best to pay attention to those. And I may not have the answer, but if I do know it, I can share it with you. And if I don't, then I can definitely follow up or point you in an area where you might be able to find it. So what I wanted to do in this webinar was really look at what were the trends before this COVID-19 pandemic started, and what are some factors and things that we kind of expect will have big impacts going forward. And so 2019 was a really difficult year for farmers. And it says here, U.S. farmers lost their fourth largest export market after China officially canceled all purchases of U.S. agriculture products, which was a retaliatory move to some of the tariffs that we had put on China. And so there is a really excellent link right here that's done by the Peterson Institute for International Economics that actually shows, you probably heard on the news, tariffs, you probably, you know, some of you very much have seen the direct impacts. I've worked with states that, for example, pecan farmers have really had a hard time in some states selling their product, and all of these different, all sorts of agriculture products have really been impacted by this, and farmers by the trade war. And this particular site really explains what happened. So it'll say, okay, you know, the first battle started out with solar panel and washing machine imports. And then it gives you a little bit of the dates and what's happening. And then it goes on to say, well, the next one is about steel and aluminum as national security threats. And so it gives you exactly what happened. Trump imposes new tariffs on 450 million of steel and aluminum products. And it kind of talks about, you know, who this was with and what happened. And then it goes on to say, okay, now we move, the battle number 3 was unfair trade practices related to technology, intellectual property. But what happened in the middle of all these tit for tat back and forth with these tariffs was China decided to put tariffs on many, many agricultural products. And so interestingly enough, when you talk about COVID-19, it says, you know, according to these guys in their view, they're saying this trade war, these, you know, back and forth between the countries has forced U.S. buyers to reduce purchases from China, threatening shortages of medical products used to treat coronavirus. Ironically, some of the products that we really need now are some of the ones that have pretty high tariffs on them. And so this goes through, and then there, you know, it keeps going. There's more and more battles back and forth, and it gives you the whole history of it. And then they have a really interesting PDF that shows literally everything that happened, what we did, and then what China did back. And then, in about 2018, China said, hey, you know what, I gotta find it down here. I mean, they put on everything from, we're also fighting with the European Union, but in the middle of this, that's when they decided we're gonna put all of these different tariffs on certain agriculture products. So this starts to impact farmers majorly in 2019. Soy was one of the first things that was really hit. Corn, again, these are not crops that you and I find migrant families in, but they very much impact feed costs. They impact ethanol, the byproducts of ethanol can be used in the, I can't think of the feedlots. So we're all kind of tied together. And so these imports and exports tariffs really start to impact where people buy and sell. So Zippy Duval is the president of the American Farm Bureau Federation, and he said, so last August, to just back up a little bit, China said, you know what, we're not buying any more US ag. Forget it, we're done. We're not gonna buy any. And so when this happened, this is what he said. He says, this is a body blow to thousands of farmers and ranchers who are already struggling to get by. So you can think, well, we have the United States. Why do we have to ship so much? We bring in, I'll show some imports and exports related to agriculture and how those are so tied together. So it says the nation lost more than 100,000 farms between 2011 and 2018, with 12,000 of those just being between 2017 and 2018. So farming was already, the last two years have been really difficult for farmers of all different types. Everything from your specialty products, which there are a lot of the things that we eat, like your lettuce and then your citrus. There's just been many different impacts that have impacted different areas. We've lost a lot of citrus to the citrus greening. Florida has been deeply impacted by that, and they've seen a little bit of that in Texas, and every single ag area, there has been different challenges. It says farm debt is at 416 billion, is at an all-time high. More than half of all farmers have lost money every year since 2013 and lost more than 1,644 this year. So that's not looking like a huge number, but one of the interesting things is if you are a farm, a lot of times on your taxes, you're putting, your loss that you have, and it's generally accepted that a lot of farmers will lose year after year, and then they're hoping that they'll have, 2 or 3 bad years will then be offset by a very good year. And so they kind of hedge their bets for when those good years will happen. So this agriculture exit, as far as China saying, hey, we're not buying anymore, also was during the same year. We've had record flooding. We've had, if it's not raining one place, there's a major drought in other places. And so you've got all of these, you've got your flooding, your droughts, and your trade war escalations that have really lowered your prices and your profits. And so this was all kind of what was happening before we have this pandemic. So it says agriculture exports to China dropped by more than half last year, but in 2017, China imported 19.5 billion in agriculture products, making it the second largest buyer overall for American farmers. So again, you can read a lot more clicking on the source and finding out a whole bunch more information. But in 2018, that dropped to 9.2 billion as the trade war escalated, and then last year it increased even more. So it says, this year, China's agriculture imports from the U.S. are down roughly 20%. U.S. grain, dairy, and livestock farmers have seen their revenue evaporate as a result. It says, over the last 6 years, farm income has dropped 45% from 123.4 billion in 2013 to 63 billion last year, according to the USDA. Now we have a comment. It says, how do you recommend as a rule of thumb for identifying reputable, reliable, and accurate resources that are not too politically or otherwise biased? Now, you're going to see a bias in a lot of different places. What I generally try to do is read, 5 to 10 articles related to, like, as you see, most of these will come from different sources. And a lot of the institutes of, agriculture, when you start seeing farm bureaus coming out and saying this is a real challenge, Farm Bureau is going to be on, it's going to generally represent farmers. So you want to look at the sources of what the content is coming from. And for example, when you look at the tariffs and you go to that website that I sent you, that I mentioned, it's literally documenting this is what happened, then this is what happened. And you can check that by Googling all sorts of sources and it will show you that. So what I've tried to include would be those reputable ones. Because when you're not talking, not facing the screen, Mike, it's a little, okay. I am facing my screen. I'm not sure. I'll try to stay nice and close. But anyway, you're going to see that depending on what side, but there are a lot of farmers unions and there are a lot of real straightforward articles that can show you and give you that data. Anything you can get from the USDA is going to be straightforward like this, showing this is just the amount of loss that they've had as far as this decline. And so that's easily documented. So the US currently leverages 25% tariffs on 250 billion in Chinese goods, while China tariffs on US imports are currently at 110 billion. So China will also consider imposing tariffs on US agriculture imports it has already purchased. We are not out of this trade war. And so that that really is a concern to farmers of what's happening. Noticing some of you are raising your hand. I cannot, you're going to have to put your comments directly into the comment box if you have a comment, and then I'll try to answer that. So this phase one of the trade war is now of kind of phasing back in and buying, reducing some of these tariffs has started. It says China agreed to purchase an additional 200 billion in US goods over the next 2 years as part of this phase one trade deal. The initial purchases will come on top of the 2017 US export numbers. So this deal basically stipulates that Beijing will buy 77 billion in additional goods and services in 2020 and 123 billion in 2021 to meet the total 200 billion. So this back in 2017, we were at 186 billion of US goods is what they were buying. So they're wanting to get back to that plus a little bit more. So in the meantime, we are still producing lots of farm products. And so here are some of the numbers of, you can see that China, the dark blue is 2018. You can kind of see the numbers of where, where we're sending our exports to based on the years. And so you can see we've seen a real increase in Canada and Mexico. And this article is from, and you can click on the link, you can click on the picture and read more. This was from February 5th, and it says that Mexico is our #1 trade partner for the first time despite overall US trade decline. So this is from census data that's showing, it says at the same time, overall US trade fell for the 4th time in the last 6 years. And Mexico's trade with the United States has totaled 614 billion in 2019. So you can see that there was a little bit of an increase. And Canada is now our 2nd ranked trade partner for the 5th straight year. Now, if you were to ask people, do we have a trade deal with Mexico and Canada? Some people think that we do. It is still in the works. It has not all the way come through, and so we'll look at exactly where we are with that. So farmers generally have been very supportive of President Trump's policies with the tariffs. There is kind of all over the place. Sometimes people say, well, I don't like this, right? But according to a lot of the farmers did vote for, and they are hoping that there'll be some sort of, that through this, that the outcome in the end will be good. But right now they have been battered like crazy. So if you could take a look at all the different trade deals we have here, this just says US trade agreements 1947 to 2015. And again, you can click on this and read more. Just kind of shows that the amount of trade that we've had over the years has increased a whole bunch. And so you've got your US agriculture exports, so what we're sending out and what we're bringing in. And so ironically, we may be sending out, so many millions of tons of potatoes and then also bringing in so many tons of potatoes from somewhere else. So our products go all over the place. And the food that you and I eat at the store comes from all over the world. So we produce lots of things, but we really are very much reliant on this trade cycle between other places and other countries. And so if you take a look right here, it shows the sum of the tariffs, just a quick, the tariff that was imposed by China based on, through this trade back and forth. It says, so 50% on cotton. So if you're not really familiar with what that means that there's a tax of, for 50% tax that's been put on that. And so the cotton grower in Texas has to decide whether they're going to take that hit, or the buyer in China has to decide whether they're going to take that hit, or they decide together. Or you and I, when we go to the store, will pay more for our jeans. It's somewhere along the line, someone's going to have to pay that extra tariff. And so you can see that, if US has all of this cotton ready to, to send to different places in the world, and China or another country can buy it from a country where they know that there's not going to be a tariff, suddenly there are new trade movements between other places, because the US is right now at this time, they say, well, I may buy your cotton right now, and next year the tariff could be higher, it could be lower. So a lot of those markets that existed where farmers had specific places they sent their products have been disrupted through this, because on one side or the other, they're trying to find a more secure deal. And so these are just a few of the things. You know, look at seafood. It says this includes more than 150 varieties of seafood and seafood products, but not all of seafood exports. So then there's things like whiskey or sorghum, but these tariffs have impacted all sorts of products. So depending on the farmer that you have, that you're working with, depending on what product they're selling, depending on if that product has had a tariff on it, they're in different situations. And so, and depending on whether they found a new market for their product. So this has been one of the realities before the pandemic started, and is very much still there today, but has been kind of put kind of to the side with all of these other challenges that they're facing today. So let me make sure I'm paying attention to your questions. Okay, I don't see any more right now. So. Okay, so it says here, I thought this was an interesting comment. It says, 2019, the Farm Belt felt about as hospitable as the asteroid belt. Record rainfall turned fields to sludge and made it nigh on impossible to plant corn and soybeans. Those of you that are in Illinois, that are in Kansas and Iowa, Nebraska, you've seen this. And it says it's impossible to plant corn and soybeans until long after the typical window had passed. President Trump's long-running trade war cut off farmers' access to China's enormous market. Access across the farm sector, commodity prices remained in the doldrums. So again, this is something you can easily look, you know, depending on whatever way you feel about the, you know, the trade war, you can find all sorts of information as just the direct impacts, regardless of what side that you're on, or even if you are on a side. And so they did come through with assistance for farmers to say, okay, we're going to help. We know that the trade war has really impacted a lot of markets. We know that numbers are a little bit crazy. So they did have a package. So they did have a package to help farmers. So it says, without government assistance, U.S. farm income would have fallen about $5 billion from its already low 2018 level. So the $14.5 billion, there was bailout money that was given to farmers. It says about 3/4 of the funding has already been distributed. So you can take a look and listen. Now, of course, this, depending on it's just kind of explaining what's happening here. So there's a question that says, so the trade didn't stop to China, it just slowed based on who wanted to pay the tariff or not. At some point, in August of last year, it stopped. Some of those have come back, but before that, I mean, at August of last year, they said, we're not buying any U.S. agriculture products. So for a short window of about 2 months, a lot of that completely came to a halt. Some things are moving very slowly, but what's happening is places are buying, China's buying from other countries. We are also working on deals with other countries. So farmers are trying to have to find new markets, or it may not be the farmer, it may be whoever they sell their corn or their soybeans or their product to, who is then trying to find a market for that. So here's this is from the Agriculture Department's Economic Research Service, and it's just a slide that they had to show what farm sector profits look like right now and how it's been adjusted for inflation. And then it shows payments and how insurance and farm income, how you can see where we are, that 2013 was the highest that it's been for a long time. And right now you can see that, you know, that things are not that great. So here's where payments went when they kind of try to help farmers through all these, you know, with all the tariffs that are happening. Here's where a lot of the different payments left. So depending on what state you're, some of your states have very few dots and some are almost completely covered, just depending on what types of crops and what farmers were eligible through that program. This is a really interesting tool that takes a look at how the United States uses its land. And so this, just to kind of give you a little bit of background to say, okay, a lot of us are familiar with our own states, but we may not know, you know, 2 states over what it looks like and what they're growing. So this is kind of saying, okay, we have this, here's our country. We have pasture, we have forest, we have cropland, we have special use, which may be a specific type of crop, miscellaneous in urban areas. And so this is kind of a cool tool. You can scroll down and the map stays the same, but then it kind of changes depending on what it's showing. So it says if you were to kind of really take a look at what our country is made of, you've got 654 million acres of pasture range, you've got 68 million acres of miscellaneous, 69 million of urban. Let me see if I can see what they had behind it. I can't see what's behind the cropland, and then the blue is special use. And then it goes on, and then the green is forest. So you can kind of see we have all of these different things happening in our country. This is gathered together. Cropland would take up more than 1/5 of all the 48 states. Pasture and rangeland would cover most of the western US, and all the country's cities and towns would neatly fit in the Northeast. So you can just kind of see what we're made of. So here it kind of shows, here's the urban areas across our country. It says the urban areas make up about 3.6% of the total size of the United States. 4 in 5 Americans live and work there. With so much of the US population in urban areas, it's little surprise that, that these areas contribute an outsized amount to the economy. The 10 most productive metropolitan areas alone contributed to 40% of the US GDP. So kind of moving along, it says, so this would be, if we just looked at the urban areas of what it actually takes up in the country, it would fit nicely up in that area over there. Someone asked, where can you find this information? You can literally, in the presentation, I will put that on the webinar page on IRC, and you can click on that original link in the presentation and find all of, find pretty much everything that I'm telling you. You can link back to exactly where I got it. So then if you take a look at this, it says the US is becoming more urban, about an average rate of about 1 million additional acres a year. So that has an impact on agriculture as far as, where this is happening. It has an impact on water, but here's where it's looking of these more urban areas. And then it says the US categorizes national parks, wildlife areas, highways, railroads, and military uses as special use areas. So if you were to take a look at this, this would be cemeteries, golf courses, marshes, deserts, and other areas of low economic value. This is about how much land in the United States it would take up. And then it says more than 100 million acres are park and wilderness areas where most commercial activities such as logging, mining, and grazing are excluded. And then agricultural land takes up about 1/5 of the country. And I found this kind of interesting. There's 52 million acres that are idle or fallow, so not using. You got 38 million in ethanol, biodiesel, 77 million in food that we actually eat, 127 for livestock feed, 62 million other grain and feed exports, 13 million in cotton and non-food, and then 21.5 in wheat exports. So the food that we actually eat is a very small amount, but you can see how we're kind of tied together. We have programs a lot of times to actually have land be fallow and not be used for different conservation programs. But this is what they're saying. This is the actual amount of land, of course, not in that space, but across the country, of what it would look like of what we're using for agricultural land. And it says the land used to grow the food Americans eat is much smaller, only the size of Indiana, Illinois, and half of Iowa. More than 1/3 of the entire corn crop is devoted to ethanol production, and most cropland is used for livestock feed exports or is left idle for the land to recover. So you can just see we've got potatoes, just a tiny bit, barley, tree nuts, rice. You can kind of see corn for sweeteners, soybeans, peanuts, and wheat. You can just kind of take a look at what in this whole big, huge country, these are the areas. I mean, this is the amount that's going directly to the food that we eat. And then it says, while the US benefits from an overall agricultural trade surplus, and this is back in 2018 is when this was kind of put together. Americans imported 15% of their food and beverage products in 2016. More than 30% of fresh fruits and vegetables Americans consume come from other countries, predominantly Mexico and Canada. And the amount of US land used to produce citrus fruits is larger than Rhode Island. So I'm mentioning this because you'll see in the big picture of how we produce a lot of food, but we also rely on a lot of other places for our food. So it says that more than 1/3 of the US land is used for pasture, by far the largest land use type in all of the states. And nearly 25% of that land is administered by the federal government. and that land is open for a grazing fee. So you can kind of see here's, you know, U.S. feed, here's the pasture, here's the livestock feed, and kind of see what it looks like. And there is a single major occupant on all of this land being cows. Between pastures and cropland used to produce feed, 41% of U.S. land in the states revolves around livestock. And so this is kind of, you can see, you know, cows. Later on, we'll talk a little bit about the different type of meat industry of things that are changing. And just remember this slide of how much land is also devoted to livestock. And so forest land is also a major category of land, and unprotected forests and timberland constitute a quarter of the contiguous United States, with one company owning about 2.3% of that timberland. You can kind of see in that section. So timber is something that a lot of us, some of us see movement where families might be eligible, but there is definitely a lot of that work across the country. So there is this kind of weird picture where you know, in this, going back to the presentation, where you think, what is this? If you were to take a look at all of that, you know, all of those different things, here's how it would look to see the amount of federal wilderness, the cow pasture range, the food we eat, livestock feed. I thought it was just interesting how we have all of these things kind of broken up, and just how much, you know, we may be a maple syrup state, and you see the amount is just a tiny bit of us are involved in that, you know, golf and Christmas trees. And then, so this to me was just kind of interesting when you take a look at how we're all interconnected. That was a very interesting website to take a look at that. So again, if you want to access that and look at it a little bit more, you just click on that picture and it'll take you there. So going back to kind of where we are with the farms, in 2018, it said 70% of farm households had a high level of financial risk in 2018. But of those that qualify as very large, so those that have the median income of over $756,000, only 25% fit into that same category. So your smaller farms were really struggling. That's where that risk is really high. So it says the last 2 years have been marked by a sharp rise in bankruptcies. Again, this is something you can Google and see all different states. A quarter of the nation's farms sit in super agriculture dependent areas. So that means that, you know, that they kind of depend on each other. When one or two farms in an area, let's say you're a dairy state and you've got a couple of, you know, dairies, and they're all shipping to the same, you know, middleman, you lose a couple of those and it impacts the other ones. So they're saying these are people, these are places that really depend on each other. It says places where more than 1 in 7 people live on farms. Among them, the rate of farm-specific bankruptcies has more than tripled since 2015. So it says the growth in farm debts has outstripped farmers' stagnant equity stakes, leaving them at higher risk of insolvency than they have seen at any point since the end of Great Recession. It's compounded by an unwelcome mix of lackluster prices for corn and soybeans in the open market and low yields caused by extreme weather. So you know, again, corn and soy is not where we're seeing families, but it's impacting across. Then there's these ideas of crop insurance, of places that some crops are eligible for crop insurance, some are not. A lot of our vegetables and fruits are not receiving, you know, if, for example, in Florida, when they had the hurricanes come through, it took a very long time for farmers to see any of that emergency disaster aid. It may have taken up to 2 years in some places. And so if a farm loses half of the citrus trees due to a hurricane, a lot of times they don't have the income to, or they didn't have an insurance to kind of cover them. Some commodities are covered, but this is interesting maps of over the last, since 2009, of where crop payouts from flood or excessive rain have happened. And you can kind of see some places consistently keep having it. You know, you take a look at Florida over the last bit for flood or rain damage, you can see some states have really been impacted and some have not. It says even with help from the federal government, U.S. farm profits are only 2/3 of the inflation adjusted $136.6 billion farmers pocketed in 2013, the best year in recent memory. This year's total is almost directly in line with average profits since 2000. Adjusted for inflation, the bailout alone can't make up for that collective hammering farmers took for 4 straight subpar years. So it's like, this is an interesting headline. This was from up in New York. It said, the headline read this. It says, while the prices of fresh fruits and vegetables have increased for consumers, the prices that farmers receive for their produce has not kept up and even gone down in some cases. The USDA has failed to conduct a full review of fresh fruit and vegetable market for decades, and structural changes have then left many farmers facing uncertainty and low prices. So you can delve into any industry, any particular commodity area, whether or product in the U.S. right now, and take a look at those challenges that they're facing. And so we have a comment that says, "I believe my dad used to get paid to not grow hay." Yes, there's lots of conservation programs that sometimes they will pay you to put your land fallow, and so they're depending on what part of the country you are and what kind of crop you're growing. That usually is for things like corn and soybeans and that. But going back to this headline, it says, our New York farmers are facing a price-producing crisis throughout the state, and the same thing is happening in other places. Fresh fruit and vegetable growers are hurting because the prices they get for their produce have stayed flat, and in some cases have even gone down, while the middlemen who move the produce from farmers to grocery stores and grocery store shoppers have seen prices for the same produce increase. And so that was for Senator Gillibrand, who is a member of the Senate Agriculture Committee. It says, despite this, the USDA has not viewed the fruit and vegetable industry in decades. We have not reviewed. We need to understand what is causing these unfair prices for our farmers, and I'm calling on the USDA to complete a top to bottom review of the fruit and vegetable industry. And so she has a kind of on her website a little bit more information, and she says that in the last 5 years alone, New York has lost more than 11,000 acres of vegetable production. And so her concern is saying, what's causing this? What is the reason? You say, I don't have someone just said, the more you move, the less we hear. I do not. Can you stay still? I don't know if I can stay still, but I'm standing here right in front of my computer. So going on to the NAFTA deal. So we noticed earlier in the earlier slides that Canada and Mexico are two of our largest trading states, or trading countries. And so this is from April 6th. This is just really recent. So they've already signed the agreement. It was signed by President Trump. It was signed by Enrique Peña, who was the former Mexican president. It was also signed by Justin Trudeau in 2018. But in 2013, in March 13th, the Parliament of Canada ratified this. And it's taken some time for all countries to be able to ratify and move this. But right now, we were supposed to have an implementation date of this new deal between, basically the new NAFTA between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. It was supposed to start June 1. There has been, some people have reached out and said, maybe we should delay this, where other ones have said, absolutely not, we really need to get this going. And so if you want to read a little bit more about where we are with that, you can click on there. But they're hoping the Trump administration say, no, we really need to move forward and have this in place by June 1. And so this is something that a lot of farmers have really been wanting, because before this, without this deal, at any point, if the administration decided to add tariffs to certain things, we don't have a working agreement between the three countries to say we won't do this or we won't do this. And so they're saying we need these agreements in place, that way the trade becomes more secure. And so our Mexican counterparts or our Canadian counterparts can buy from us without fears that there will be an additional tariff put on some of their products. So then we kind of turn a little bit to another major challenge that farmers are facing right now, and this is the labor shortage. And so every single one of these pictures is a different article that talks about what's happening. And so you can click on any of them and read, and these are really well done. It's just talking about just this one's just looking at, this was from September of last year, looking at what's happening in California, and just some interesting, slides that images they have. 70% of California farmers were short on workers in 2018. You've got 750,000 undocumented immigrants leaving California between 2007 and 2017, and 2/3 of the U.S. fruits and nuts are grown in California. So they're saying, you've got, this is all the way, this is back in 2018. We saw this before that, though. We started seeing labor shortage has been something that's been happening the last 5 years. We've just seen it all over. And so these articles just talk about what's happening and what's going on. But the main issue is, I was talking with somebody the other day, and they said, well, why on earth are we seeing so much more H-2A? Why would a farmer want to pay for housing and guarantee pay? The real problem is they just want to ensure that they can guarantee that they'll have that workforce. And so we've seen this in so many states where you have competing crops happening and a shortage of workers, and those workers can go back and forth depending on who's paying more. And I may have a crop ready and just not have enough bodies in the field to get it out. And so that's why we've seen this increase all over in different states with saying, hey, even right now in the pandemic, we've halted immigration, we've halted a lot of these things, but we've waived saying we need more farm workers, we need people coming in. And so this across the board lack of labor is something that is absolutely has really challenged farms before the pandemic and is still very much on the minds of farms right now and then going forward after this. So there's a really interesting link here that is by Ag America, and they are a lending company to all sorts of farmers, and they have this really well done infographic that it talks about so many of the reasons why there's a labor shortage. And a lot of us might say, okay, immigration is the reason, but it's a lot of reasons. And so they have these, and I don't know if you can see them very well. This is something you can kind of take a look at afterwards. It shows just this decline of the number of hired farm workers and family farm workers. So just 7% decline in hired workers, 8% increase in farm labor wages. So you can know that farms, if you're, we talk about the fruits and vegetables that they were just mentioning, prices being stagnant. If I now have to pay an 8% increase in farm labor wages, that is going to majorly impact how much I can produce and what my product. If I can't ask more for my product as a farmer, I'm going to have to find a way to take that hit. So there's been a 52% decline of hired farm workers and a 73% decline of family farm workers. And so they say that, perception has just been because of immigration policies, but they also say there's lots of reasons. One can be declining interest in agriculture for youth as a field to go into. Inefficient agricultural labor programs. So the programs we have are not quite working. Also a decline in birth rates in Mexico. There are less people wanting to come, and many of our farms right now, our average age is between 55 to 57 years old across the country for the farmers themselves. And so here it says 59 is the average age of principal operators. And producers ages 35% and younger account for only 9% of farmers. So they're saying that this decline is driven by the factors of, farms are expensive, land is very expensive. It's very expensive to get started right up front, to have all the machinery and have the things that you need. Then you add these commodity prices where you're not sure exactly what you're going to get for your product. You add the weather in there, the amount of work that has to be done, and this heavy physical demand, and it's just really becoming a real challenge. So then they say, well, we do have the H-2A program. Immigrants account for 13% of the US population, 17% of the total US workforce, but 73% of the agricultural labor force. So you see it's absolutely vital. And then you're saying despite having more than doubled in the past decade, the H-2A program is still underutilized. And they say because of many inefficiencies. I know a couple years ago, they had, the workers didn't come on time. The visas were delayed for a couple months, and that can be just disastrous for a farmer. So you've got this real challenge of, what's happening. So it says the total number of H-2A visas, has continued to grow. And when they did this was just at 89,000. We're way above that right now. So it's just really, really a challenge. And so they're saying, what are we doing to appease this? What are we doing? How are we working with our farms? And that farms are saying we have shifted away from the most labor intensive crops. So things like vine ripe tomatoes, we're not growing. And instead they say they're using ag technology to reduce some of that burden, scaling back some of their farm operations, placing a hold on expansion, extending guest worker programs to try to have them longer, adopting crops that will use less laborers, maybe leasing part of their land, and then some are moving their operations other places. And then they try to raise wages and benefit packages so that more people will come and work for them. So I think for us, we have to know that it makes our job a little more difficult because we need to make sure that our farmers, we're reaching out to them, but we also know all of these incredible challenges that they're facing. And so it's really been, so we have a comment that says, Pine tree planters were delayed from Guatemala for 2 years in a row. Many companies had to employ more Mexicans. You can see this is happening. The rain, you got too much rain. It's just across the board. There's so many things that they're facing. So I would suggest that I was hoping that to be able to put some links that, again, you can look for other sources if you feel like maybe you want to see the bigger picture. You can just Google and find more information about this. And so then changing a little bit topics. Let me check how much time we have. Okay, we're still okay. We've seen some real changes in the way people eat. And so you've got this idea of fake meat versus real meat. Some of you maybe have tried the Impossible Burger or different types of Beyond Burger, different types of meats that are now available that were not available before. And it says the alternative meat industry is worth more than $800 million and accounts for 2% of packaged meat sales, which counts Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat as two of its top contenders. So interesting enough, Beyond Meat shares have skyrocketed more than 500% since May of 2019. That puts their company's current value at about $100 billion. So this was something that most of us were not really aware of several years ago, but now you can find these across the country, all over the place. And so this is where you can find Beyond Meat. This is where you can find Impossible Foods. And again, you can click on these links. And it says, do you think that fake burgers are what most people are, it's vegetarians that are eating? That say no, most of their customers are meat eaters, that they're just trying different things. And there's been some political pushback. It says in pressure from the agriculture industry, 12 states have passed laws limiting the use of the word meat on packaging for plant-based alternatives. And so that you can see, the little black dots where that is. But it says meat alternatives are clearly having a moment, and it's offering us a glimpse into a different kind of future for meat. So when you look at trends, one of the things that you want to follow is eating habits and how we eat as a country. And we have all sorts of choices. And so dairy has really struggled over the years. And now you can go to a dairy window, just stand in your grocery store and look at all the choices that you have for milk, all the, almond milk and oatmeal milk. Well, the meat industry has said we've got to be really careful with this and not allow these types of particular so-called meat be called meat. And so they're packaging using this to say we don't want the same thing to happen where people see these products as one and the same. And so at the same time, the other side is saying, hey, look at how much land is used by cows. Look at how much we could save if we have this other industry. And so you've got all of these forces kind of playing against each other. But you and I going to work with the meat processor or work with the farmer or work with the feedlot, they very much have all these impacts and things that are happening. And you also have some of the very large meat processors supporting and actually investing money in some of these alternative meats to see what happens. And so then we have lab grown meat. So forget vegetarian, forget that it's made out of plant products. This is literally a product that's made in a lab. And so they have here, it says lab grown, kind of move this box out of the way, lab grown startups and their supporters believe that their products can one day make cows, pigs, and chickens, and even fish obsolete. Memphis Meats, Fenless Foods, Super Meat, all of these are working on companies, they're companies trying to find ways to basically have meat without any animals. And they have a compelling argument. If you could grow enough meat in a lab to satisfy at least some of the world's demand, and if you could solve some of the problems of animal welfare, why wouldn't you do it? And yesterday, I literally saw an article that was saying, and if you didn't have to worry about meat processors' safety, and you could just make this in a lab, it would. So this right now is very much on the forefront of people's concerns to say, what's going to happen? Where's this going to go? And so that is one of the trends that we're kind of, keeping an eye on to see what happens. So here's a few, sorry, I clicked too fast. Here are a few slides that, again, you can click on and learn more. And then there's other things where they're talking about fungi-based meats and trying to come up with these basically made from a fungus and not made from, the lab-grown meat is actually made from the animal cells, and there's a whole process that goes on, but they're looking at, can we actually come up with a new protein? And so that has really been an interesting thing. It says Soylent Greens, you've got, yeah. So they're clicking down here. Here are, if this is new to you and you haven't heard of this, Here are a whole bunch of different videos that just, some are from the perspective from the lab grown meat, some are from the perspective of the farmer saying, hey, why do you have a problem with GMO, genetically modified, seeds, and now you're perfectly fine with this completely modified product. And so there's a lot happening. And then you have, here you can see this 3 days ago video on the bottom that says how lab grown meat could solve shortages. So we're all over the page with this across the country on what this looks like. And I remember for IDRC years ago, we did a ag trends, and it was like, oh, they made chicken without the chicken. And I thought, well, that's not going to go anywhere. Who's going to want that? Obviously, I was very wrong, because now it's all over the place. And then kind of shifting, we've got about 15 minutes or so, and I'll try to stand still so that you can hear me good. We've really seen with the pandemic that a lot of the parts of our food chain that are vulnerable, or that are really consolidated, or that are really impacted by certain things, they're seeing that this food supply chain has really been impacted, as you guys have seen. You go and the toilet paper. But interesting, it talks about how our US system has two different food supply chains. One is for the restaurants and the commercial side, and one is for what you and I go buy at the grocery store. And that this pandemic has really shown how those two are very separate and not easily moldable back and forth. And so it says here, we've gone to the store, it says grocery stores, shoppers are being met with empty store shelves, not because there's a shortage of food, because this nation, our food supply is really trying to cope and get the food where it needs to be. And then there's a slump in demand from the restaurants, our schools are not running. And so you've got these different types of products that we've all seen pictures of news articles of fields of potatoes or food being donated to food banks, or dairy farmers literally having to dump their milk because their milk was supposed to go to schools and it's not, not being used. And so it says, let me see, somehow I got the whole chat box instead. It says, with restaurants and food and schools closed, food service demand has evaporated, making the change from processing and packaging items for food service clients to preparing food for retail sales. It has proven to be a long and difficult process for food manufacturers. And so you see that this is, I've got to figure out, make this small. Here we go. Let me see, there's a couple comments. It says, I thought schools were still making meals, and food pantries and food kitchens were making more of those needs. If you take a look at the sheer amount of hotels and restaurants and there's just no way that all of a sudden all food banks and all schools are getting that food. And it takes a while for those supply chains to be rerouted. I believe there's I think it's the next slide. This one talks about the food route, the supply of our food, where our food goes and how it moves. And so if you click on this, there's a really interesting article that talks about just how intricate and how efficient our system normally is, but you'll have 2 or 3 places that are really integral in getting certain products out. And then there's a very interesting, this was done, I think, by NPR, that's talking about these 2 different food supply chains and how hard it is to take cheese, for example, that's supposed to go to a particular restaurant that's in a big block, to now suddenly go to the grocery store with not the right packagers in the middle. Talks about right now with the meat processing plants being closed because of workers getting sick, of just your pigs, for example. At a certain weight, they're supposed to go to the processor. At a certain weight, they now would empty where they're at, and you'd make room for new pigs to come up. Suddenly, if I don't have the processor, if it's not open, my pig completely loses a value, and I've got to decide, what do I do with the piglets? I still have this big, huge pig. What am I going to do? Where on this, process, I have 1 or 2 places that I sell this product to, and they're not open. So suddenly I can't move with my product. And so suddenly the efficiency in this system has really been majorly impacted right now by the pandemic. So this slide here just shows core counties for the US food supply. It says a study showed that these 9 counties, mostly in California, and I think I saw a couple of you guys that are from right there, are most central to the overall structure of the food supply network. A disruption to any of these counties has a ripple effect for the entire food chain. So you're seeing these are the places that are the outflow where they're heading out. And then there's the inflow. So these are places that are getting this and then distributing it out. So you have distribution centers, you have all of these different players along the line that are on this slide that show this like web. But right now what's happening is a lot of those products are not getting out. Those farmers, you know, especially, they call them specialty crop farmers, you know, in Florida, for example, that they have fields where there's no one that wants their special type of bok choy, for example, that was for a particular restaurant chain. On this video, I mean, on this audio thing that you can listen to, they were talking about how one place in California, the restaurant decided to they basically bought everything local from farmers. They turned what they normally buy for their produce into a CSA. So they have the community supported agriculture where people could pay $40 and the restaurant is still receiving their produce. And now people can come and get a box of whatever it was of their portion that they pay for. And the restaurant's saying, well, at least we're still supporting our farmers, but we don't have the same needs. Everything's completely shifted. So as you and I think, well, you know, the schools are open, the schools get their food from a certain place. And so it's just not, you know, a lot of them, some places are having to euthanize animals. Some are, you know, trying to find new places for them to be sold, but this is not a fast process. So you see the plants continuing to close. On the news articles that we put for IRC, there are several that are opening back up again. They've been closed for 2 weeks, but again, they're saying that, you know, the Smithfield and some of these plants process 5-7% of all U.S. meat market, you know, in the whole market. So of course, if they go down, then that's going to majorly impact other places. So I'm trying to pay attention to comments and okay. So then there's the idea of we still have our farm workers out there working. How are we protecting them? And so this is something that we're seeing a lot of movement. I'm seeing a ton of articles now really focused on, hey, these are essential workers. Could we, you know, can we do things to protect them? And so that may be a silver lining throughout this, that maybe in the end there'll be some more focus on just how valuable farm workers are in this, and then to address this direct labor shortage that we have. So maybe I'm just have my head in the clouds, but there's some really interesting articles right here talking about farm work and how do we protect them. And then at the same time, there's also taking a look at like H2A. On some side, they're saying, well, you know, maybe we're paying people too much. Maybe we need to, farms are in such bad shape right now. Maybe we need to lower the wage that they're getting. So I feel like everything keeps changing back and forth. And so as far as ag trends, we're seeing these major challenges that were already happening, that were already related to the markets, that were already related to, you know, to just different policies that farmers are hoping that in the end it will pay off and that they'll be able to sell products, say, you know, in many other places. But at the same time, USDA just this week released a temporary rule to allow H2A workers. It says the Department of Homeland Security, with the support of the USDA, has released a temporary final rule to change certain H2A requirements to help employers avoid the disruption and protect the food supply. But basically, the idea was a petitioner with a valid temporary labor certificate who is concerned that workers will be unable to enter the country due to travel restrictions can start employing certain foreign workers who are in the United States. Let me make sure I'm not reading absolutely everything, but so they received this petition, but no earlier than the start date of the employment. But to take advantage of this time, they can seek a change where they could keep them. Basically, they can hire them. Let me move this out of the way. Whenever I move this, the whole thing goes away. So it says here, the USCS is temporarily amending its regulations to protect the country's food supply by allowing H2A workers to stay beyond the 3-year maximum allowable period of stay in the United States. So kind of in a nutshell, if I have a farm and I need to get H2A workers, I can actually hire some H2A workers that are already here, and I don't have to always go through that whole process of bringing new ones. And so it says, these changes will encourage and facilitate the continued lawful employment of foreign, temporary, and seasonal agriculture workers during this national emergency. Agriculture employers should utilize the streamlined process if they are concerned about their ability to bring in temporary workers. So they're kind of amending some of those rules that they've had before. So let me see where we are. I think we're pretty close to finishing up here. Let's see. We've got about 3 minutes. The last little bit that I was going to talk about was the dairy, just the challenges that the dairy farms are having right now. Most of us have probably seen, this, why are people, dumping their milk? It says disruption to food supply chains due to coronavirus is causing tons of fresh produce to be wasted. Despite food shortages and high demand for dairy produce, the Dairy Farmers of America has had to ask farmers to dump their milk. So what's happened is that disruption in supply chains, like we've said, the short shelf life. This is not a corn, this is not soybeans, this is not hay or something that can be packed somewhere and saved. It's perishable. And so it's really impacted the dairies that already were very much challenged. It says dairy farmer Jason Liedl felt his stomach churn when he got a call. It said, we need you to start dumping your milk. And so they are supposed to be paid for their milk, but at this point, Dairy Farmers of America is saying, we can't take it. We don't need it right now. So the dairies industry's woes, they really show those broader problems in the global food supply chain, according to farmers, agriculture economists, and food distributors. So the dairy business got hit harder and earlier than other agriculture commodities because their products cannot be frozen like meat or put in a silo like grain. So they're seeing these disruptions. We're seeing some countries say, look, we're not going to ship these products. We're going to hold on because we're not sure what the pandemic is going to look like for us. They've seen a shortage of refrigeration containers. They've seen a shortage of truck drivers. And that has slowed the shipment of staples such as meat and grains in some places. So we are really in kind of an unprecedented time. And we think, okay, we'll just shift, make the shift. But it says here it would take millions of dollars, for instance, to install new equipment to switch a plant from making one type of cheese, such as barrel cheese, used to make processed wedges for fast food restaurants, to producing cheddar wedges for groceries. Even switching from a 10 bulk bag of shredded cheddar for food service to 8-ounce bags requires new packaging, new robots, and new labeling. So I think we've really, we've got to figure out how to, to really go through all this and see. And so as far as, what's next, I don't know. And one thing we will continue to do is post as many of those articles that we can, that you can kind of see daily what's happening, anything that we come across. So you can kind of just see each day, those are added to the website. And as I appreciate several of you guys will send and say, hey, have you seen this? And I try to get those posted. We're going to try to stay as informed as we can. This is definitely a time that we've got to, figure out what's going on and figure out what's going on with our farms, and then figure out a way that we can work with them and continue to very much help those families that we need. So I think we're right at our time limit. I hope this information has been helpful. I will go ahead and stop recording. And yes,